everybody. It is Rebecca Robbins here, Remind Shaper SLP, coming to you live on Instagram and Facebook simultaneously. Facebook, I think maybe you just caught up. Hello. I had some unexpected time this afternoon, so I decided I wanted to pop on and talk about something that came up with one of my parent coaching clients last week during our session, and it dawned on me that how important this topic is and how important it is and that I wanted to come on and talk to you all about it, and that is how to teach your child to answer yes and no questions. So if you saw the written copy of this post, I wrote, what is the one skill that will increase your child's ability to communicate with you tenfold? And that is the ability to answer yes, no questions. That's because, think about it. Think about how much information you can narrow down from your child if they can accurately answer yes, no. If they are not feeling well, or you suspect they're not feeling well, and they have the ability to answer yes or no reliably about what's happening in their body, you can narrow down what's wrong, whether they have an earache or a headache or their tummy hurts, even if they are minimally verbal or nonverbal, or don't, even if they are verbal, they just don't have that expressive language or speech ability yet to express, Mom, my stomach hurts or my head hurts. They might not have that ability yet, even if they are verbal. But if they can answer yes, no questions, then it gives you a greater chance of being able to figure out what's happening for them. It gives you a greater chance of being able to figure out what your child wants. So if they're like cranky and tantruming and you don't know what they want and you don't know what to give them, you can start narrowing it down by asking yes, no questions. And then it also relates later on to a safety skill when your child is out and about in the community. If they can answer yes, or if you can teach them to answer yes, no questions accurately about identifying information or personal information, especially if your child is nonverbal or minimally verbal, or uses an AAC device. And even if they're proficient with their AAC device, God forbid they get separated from it, the battery dies, it breaks on them, and they need to communicate with other people. If they have the ability to say yes and no in some way, shape, or form, then they will be able to get their message across, at least on some level, with someone asking them yes or no questions. So it's a really, really important skill, and it can be a little tricky. And there is not just one type of yes no question. Not all yes or no question, or not all yes or no questions are equal. There are a hierarchy of questions, and there's really two different types of yes no questions. The first type of yes no question, and this is where we start when we're going to be teaching a child yes no questions, and we want to know if they have the ability to answer yes no questions at this level, is to accept or reject an offer. So that's basically saying, yes, I want this, or no, I don't want that. Okay. This is the simplest level of a yes no question, and it is where we start. And it's very powerful because it teaches the child that when I say yes or no, I get what I want and I keep what I don't want away from me. So it can be very powerful in terms of teaching your child this language skill at a very early point in their communication development, because it gives them a lot of ownership of their environment, a lot of control over what can come in and what cannot. So I always like to use visual cues when I'm teaching my nonverbal students or my students with autism. And look, I have this upside down. And literally, these are, you can see they're like stained and faded. They're on index cards. And these are literally the yes no cards that I have used in my therapy room for years. And they're not fancy, and they're not even laminated. They're just, it's a green index card and a red index card, or pink maybe, and I just printed out a yes no symbol from the internet, And these have been my magic makers in my therapy room for years, and they're not fancy. So this just goes to show you, you don't need like all the bells and whistles and fancy things to teach this sort of a skill. But I do think that the visual cues are necessary and important, especially if the child is not able to say yes or no. That gives them something to point to or to grab or to hand you as a way to communicate. Of course, if your child is using an AAC device, an augmentative communication device, then you can always just use the device itself to teach this skill and just have them make sure they know where the yes no is and that they're pointing to that rather than using an external visual cue. Or you can have this as just an added support for them as well. So what I always do is I start with the yes, and I start with things that I know the student definitely wants. So let's see here. Let's pretend an iPad. I have my iPad here. Let's pretend your child wants the iPad, right? And you know they always want the iPad. They're never a no for the iPad. So you literally ask them, do you want the iPad? Yes. And you have them say yes right away if they can imitate the word yes. Do you want the iPad? Yes. They say yes. Good. Ask them again immediately without the prompt. Do you want the iPad? If they say yes, unprompted, give them the iPad. So it's important you give them the immediate prompt, and then you ask immediately again without the prompt, because this is what makes it so that they don't become dependent on the prompt to answer yes. And you do this a lot, and you practice many times with many different reinforcers, and eventually you try to fade away the yes. What happens sometimes is you get those kids that are echolalic, and you'll say, do you want the iPad? And they'll say iPad, right? Can anyone relate to this? Do you want the iPad? Want iPad? They repeat the end of the question. And that is especially when this errorless prompt that I'm teaching you right now is especially important, because if they're going to imitate the last thing you say, you're teaching them to say the appropriate response to the question. And at first, your goal is just to get them saying yes to the question appropriately, and later on you work on the actual discrimination of the question and how to answer accurately with a yes or no. So you build upon it. So it might look like this. Do you want the iPad? Yes. And the child says yes. Here's your iPad. Do you want the iPad? Yes. Yes, good. And then do it again. Do you want the iPad? If they don't answer right away, show them the visual cue. If they don't respond to the visual cue, give them the verbal prompt, the sound prompt. If that's not enough, you say yes. And then if they imitate yes, then you give it to them. For a nonverbal child, what you're going to do is you're going to have them point to the yes picture. Do you want the iPad? And then you point and they point, yes, here's your iPad. There you go. Or you use their communication device. So that's to accept an offer. I'm saying, do you want this? And the child says, yes, I want that. And you give it to them. This is the easiest level of yes-no question that you're going to start with. When your child is getting very consistent, answering yes to accept an offer with many different things, and you also want to get the classroom on board, get other family members on board, asking yes, do you want this? Yes. When they get proficient with that, then it's time to start to teach them how to say no. So for this, you offer things that you know your child won't like. Like you say, like if it's time for their reinforcer and you know that they want the iPad, oh, great job, you did great work. Do you want this pen? No. And then they imitate no. That's right. Do you want the pen? No, you don't want that pen. And then you put it away. And I like to be silly about it. Be like, oh, get out of here, pen. That's ridiculous. And they think that's very funny when I'm over dramatic. And then you offer something else. Do you want the highlighter? No. No. No? Oh, no highlighter. Okay, silly Rebecca. Oh my goodness. Oh my goodness. Do you want the iPad? And now you're going to give them that embedded prompt of the yes, because now you've added a new element and you want them to be able to know that we're not answering no all the time. Sometimes we're answering yes. So that's a way that you can start to introduce no, how to answer no, into the equation. And then what I like to do is I put both of the visuals out on the table. When they get pretty good at answering no in isolation to a lot of different, like, do you want the what are these called? AirPods? Earbuds? No, no, I don't want those. Do you want my glasses? No. Oh, okay, you don't want them. And here's the thing, if they say yes, and if you say, do you want the tissues? And your child says yes because they're just so used to answering yes, give them the tissues. That is teaching them that their communication matters, it's important, and it means something. Oh, yeah, here you go, here's the tissues. And then when they push it away, oh, you mean no, no tissues. Do you want tissues? No. No, say no. Okay, no, no tissues. So we want to honor what your child says because that's a very teachable moment. Okay, so this takes a lot of time, takes a lot of practice. For some of my students, I spend a whole semester just working, or a whole year just working on how to teach yes and no questions to accept or reject an offer. So once they get solid at accepting and rejecting an offer, then you move to the next level of yes no questions. And these are a little more challenging because they require a little more comprehension of the actual language concepts and the semantics that are inside of the question. So this type of question is yes or no question to affirm or deny a statement. So basically, it's to say, yes, that statement is true and correct, or no, that statement is not true. So that's like, does a cow moo? Yes. Yes, a cow moo. Does a cat bark? No, no, a cat doesn't bark. So now they get the concept of what yes means and what no means. But now you're actually working a little bit more on the language concepts inside of the question. So, with does a cat moo? Yeah, does a cow moo? And does a cat bark? I think those were the two questions I said. So, those are questions where you're really looking at their understanding of the vocabulary cat and the feature cat and cow and the features that go with that animal, knowing the animal sounds, right? So there's varying levels of abilities that your child will be able to answer a yes no question. So you want to make sure that you're asking a yes no questions that's at their language level or just above their language level, because we're going to teach them and stretch them. But targeting, this is a good time to start targeting the yes no about personal information. Is your name Joe? Yes. Do you have any brothers and sisters? No. Do you live in Goshen, New York? I say that because that's where I grew up. And being able to answer yes, no, and that way, if they are out in the community and they somehow, God forbid, get lost or separated or something like that, and another adult, a police officer, someone can maybe start to narrow down how to help them find their way home or back to someone that's looking for them. So, focusing on safety questions and personal information would be an important skill at that point. And you can still use the visual cues. But again, at this point, when you're working on answering yes, no to affirm or deny a statement, you're working a little bit less on the actual ability to say yes and no, and more so on the comprehension of the vocabulary, excuse me, the vocabulary inside the question. So, I hope this was helpful. Just to recap, we talked about yes, no. There's two types of yes, no questions. There's yes, no to accept or reject an offer. And then there's yes, no to affirm or deny a statement. So if we're affirming a statement, we're saying, yes, that statement is true. Yes, a cow moves. Or no, the cat does not bark. We're denying that. It's kind of like a true false question. Okay. And that's a higher level question. And when you're asking a yes, no question of that type, you're really more practicing the comprehension of the words inside the question itself than understanding that how to answer yes, no per se. When you're working on accept and reject and offer, you're really teaching the value of what yes means and what no means. Really important skill. And a great way to start working with this is with your child's interests and likes and reinforcers. As I said, like with the iPad, that's where we started, right? With the visual cue and what your child is highly motivated to get. And they're working on understanding. We say, do you want the iPad? They say yes. And you give it to them. They're learning to respond to a do you want question. So if you need help figuring out all the things that your child is interested in and how to use those interests to help motivate your child to want to learn and participate and make the learning process fun and engaging, check out my free PDF, The Motivation Map. This is a 5 step-by-step guide that takes you through 5 easy steps that you can implement yourself, that walks you through how from figuring out what your child's interests are and then how to use them to motivate your child to learn new skills like answering yes no questions. So you can get my motivation map on Instagram by clicking the link on the bio, and on Facebook by going to bit.ly/motivatemychild and download it for free today. If you have any questions about anything that I talked about today, please drop it in the comments. Let me know how you liked this. Let me know what other sorts of topics you'd love me to do a little jump on, do a like fast and furious mini training on. And I love to respond to my audience and their requests. So please let me know. That's it for today. That's it for today. Thank you for everyone who tuned in live, and I will see you soon. Happy Monday. Mwah. Bye.